partly armored cruiser, 4.5-inch armored belt over 2/3 of length. 1-inch steel protective deck. Old ironclads launched 1877 and 8. Ship, Fuso. Tonnage, 3,718. Heavy guns, 6. Machine guns, 8. Notes: 4.5-inch armor belt amidships. Ship, Hayei. Tonnage, 2,200. Heavy guns, 9. Notes: 7-inch armor belt, 9-inch armor on battery. Ship, Akagi. Tonnage, 615. Heavy guns, 2. Machine guns, 2. Notes: gunboat. Ship, Saikyo Maru. Tonnage, 600. Quickfirers, unknown. Notes: armed merchant steamer carrying only a few small quickfirers. Total heavy guns, 70. Total quickfirers, 128. Total machine guns, 84. Chinese fleet. Armored. Ship, Chen Yuen. Tonnage, 7,430. Heavy guns, 6. Machine guns, 12. Notes: coast defense battleships, 14-inch armor belt, 4 12-inch guns on each ship, mounted in pairs in turrets, with 12-inch armor. Ship, Ting Yuen. Tonnage, 7,430. Heavy guns, 6. Machine guns, 12. Notes: coast defense battleships, 14-inch armor belt, 4 12-inch guns on each ship, mounted in pairs in turrets with 12-inch armor. Ship, Lai Yuen. Tonnage, 2,850. Heavy guns, 4. Machine guns, 8. Notes: armored cruisers, 9.5-inch armor belt, 8-inch armor on barbettes forward. Ship, King Yuen. Tonnage, 2,850. Heavy guns, 4. Machine guns, 8. Notes: armored cruisers, 9.5-inch armor belt, 8-inch armor on barbettes forward. Ship, Ping Yuen. Tonnage, 2,850. Heavy guns, 3. Machine guns, 8. Notes: armored cruiser, 8-inch armor belt, 5 inches on barbette. Unarmored. Ship, Tsi Yuen. Tonnage, 2,355. Heavy guns, 3. Machine guns, 10. Ship, Ching Yuen. Tonnage, 2,300. Heavy guns, 5. Machine guns, 16. Notes: quickest ships in the fleet. Speed, 18 knots. Ship, Chi Yuen. Tonnage, 2,300. Heavy guns, 5. Machine guns, 16. Notes: quickest ships in the fleet. Speed, 18 knots. Ship, Yang Wei. Tonnage, 1,350. Heavy guns, 6. Machine guns, 7. Ship, Chao Yung. Tonnage, 1,350. Heavy guns, 6. Machine guns, 7. Ship, Quang Chia. Tonnage, 1,300. Heavy guns, 7. Machine guns, 8. Ship, Quang Ping. Tonnage, 1,030. Quickfirers, 3. Machine guns, 8. 4 torpedo boats and 3 small gunboats. Total heavy guns, 55. Total quickfirers, 3. Total machine guns, 120. The Chinese fleet had more armor protection. The 2 coast defense battleships were heavily armored, and there were 3 other less completely protected ironclads, although 7 other ships had no armor whatever. In the Japanese fleet, the only armored vessels were the 2 old ironclads belonging to an obsolete type, and the armor-belted Chiyoda. The real fighting force of the fleet was made up of the 7 new protected cruisers. Some of these had armor on the barbettes in which their long bow guns were mounted, but their protection consisted in a deck plated with steel covering the vitals of the ship, boilers, engines, and magazines, all placed as low as possible in the hull. There was some further protection afforded by the coal bunkers placed along the waterline amidships. The theory of the protected cruiser was that everything below the waterline was safeguarded by this armored deck. and as the overwater portion of the ship was further divided by bulkheads into numerous watertight compartments, the danger of the ship being sunk was remote. The protected cruiser is no longer regarded as having a place in the main fighting line, but the Japanese cruisers gave such good results in the Yalu battle that for a while an exaggerated value was attached to it. But in one point, and the most important of all, the Japanese had an overwhelming advantage. The Chinese officers and men were mostly brave enough, but almost entirely unskilled. The only really efficient officers and engineers they had were a few Englishmen and Americans, and 2 Germans. The Japanese, from Admiral Count Ito, who commanded, down to the youngest of the bluejackets, were not only brave with the inherited recklessness of death and suffering which is characteristic of their race, but were also highly trained in every branch of their profession, first-rate sailors, excellent gunners. And the fleet had for years been exercised in manoeuvres so that the ships could work together as an organized whole. The spirit which animated it was that of "no surrender, victory at any cost." It is a standing order of the Japanese navy that if a ship should strike her colors, the first duty of her consorts is not to try to recapture her, but to endeavor to sink her and her crew. The Mandarin Ting, who commanded the Chinese fleet, was more of a soldier than a sailor, but he had some sea experience, and was a thoroughly brave man. As soon as war was declared he was anxious to go in search of his enemy. He urged upon the Pekin government that the first step to be taken was to use the Chinese fleet to attack the Japanese transports which were conveying troops to Korea. This would, of course, lead to a battle with the enemy's fleet, but Ting was quite confident that he would defeat the Japanese if he met them. In giving this advice the Chinese admiral was reasoning on correct principles, even if his confidence in his own fighting power was not justified by facts. To keep the fleet idle at Port Arthur or Wei Hai Wei would be to concede the command of the sea to Japan without an effort to dispute it. But the mandarins at Pekin would not accept their admiral's view. In the first place they were alarmed at the fact that in a minor naval engagement off the Korean coast at the very outset of the conflict, the weak Chinese force in action had fared very badly. The quarrel in Korea had begun without a regular declaration of war. On the coast there were the Chinese cruiser Tsi Yuen and a small gunboat, the Kwang Yi. On 24 July the 2 ships had gone to sea to look for and give their escort to some transports that were expected with reinforcements from China. In the grey of the morning on the 25th they fell in with and were attacked by 3 of the swift protected cruisers of the Japanese fleet, the Yoshino, Akitsushima, and the Naniwa Kan. The fight was soon over. The gunboat was sunk and the little cruiser was attacked at close quarters by the Naniwa Kan, whose shells riddled her weak conning tower, killing all within it. The Tsing Yuen fled, pursued by the Naniwa, whose commander, by the way, was Captain Togo, famous afterwards as a victorious admiral of the Russo-Japanese War. The Tsing Yuen made good her escape only because the chase brought the Naniwa Kan on the track of the transport Kaohsing, and Togo stopped to dispose of her by sending her to the bottom. This incident made the Pekin government nervous about the fighting qualities of their ships. And then they were afraid that if Ting went to sea with all his ships, the Japanese fleet would elude him and appear with an expeditionary force at the mouth of the Pei Ho, capture the Taku forts, and land an army to march on Pekin. They therefore ordered Admiral Ting to collect his fleet at Port Arthur and watch the sea approach to the capital. The Japanese were therefore able to land their troops in Korea without interruption, and soon overran the peninsula. When they were advancing to capture Ping-yang, the Chinese began to concentrate a second army to defend the crossing of the Yalu River, the entrance into southern Manchuria. It was now evident even to the Pekin mandarins that the Japanese plans did not at this stage of the war include a raid on the Pei Ho and the Chinese capital, so Admiral Ting was at last allowed to go to sea, in order to protect the movement of transports along the western shores of the Korean Bay to the mouth of the Yalu. On 14 September 5 large steamers crowded with troops left Taku under the convoy of 6 Chinese cruisers and 4 torpedo boats, bound for the mouth of the Yalu River. Next day, as they passed Talienwan Bay near Port Arthur, they were joined by Ting with the rest of the fleet. On the second day they safely reached their destination, and the troops were disembarked, and early on the 17th Ting again put to sea with his fleet to return to Port Arthur. He had expected to have to fight the Japanese on his outward voyage, and he knew that there was a still greater chance of meeting them on his way back down the bay. He had a few white officers with him. On board his flagship, the armour-clad Ting Yuen, was a German artillery officer, Major von Hanneken. On the other battleship was Commander McGiffen, formerly of the United States Navy, nominally second in command to the Chinese captain of the Chen Yuen, but practically acting as her commander. On some of the other ships there were a few British-born engineer or gunnery officers, and some of the latter had been petty officers in the English Navy. By the advice of these non-Chinese officers, Ting had done something to remedy the defects of his fleet. A good deal of woodwork had been